Back in 1992, military vehicle manufacturer AM General introduced a civilian version of its most famous truck, the Humvee. Later renamed to be the Hummer, AM General would sell it to General Motors, which called it the H1, and followed it up with the still huge H2 and the less huge H3, but ultimately gave it up after their 2009 bankruptcy. And now the Hummer name has returned as a new GMC electric truck. This is the story of the GM truck brand known as Hummer. This is My Old Car. So admittedly, I have not gotten a lot of requests to do an episode about the Hummer brand, but I recently got an email from a viewer who suggested it, and I had just seen one of the new electric GMC Hummers on the road here in the Detroit area, so I figured now could be a good time to talk about the original Hummer brand, as the name is showing up more now in the automotive news. I'll talk a bit later about the new Hummer, but the focus of this episode will be on the original. The story of the Hummer brand begins with a company that designed and built what is arguably the most famous off-road vehicle, the Jeep, thanks to its pivotal role in World War II. Although it was built and marketed by Willys Overland following the war, it would later be bought by Kaiser Motors, which in turn would name their company Kaiser Jeep by 1963, and then in turn be bought by American Motors, or AMC, in 1970. Although AMC would continue to sell civilian trucks under the Jeep brand, it also had a separate general products division of Jeep, which sold to the military. In 1971, AMC spun off this portion of Jeep to become AM General Corporation. However, by 1982, with AMC in financial distress, they merged with French automaker Renault, who took a controlling interest in the company. Yes, a company named American Motors was, for several years, French-owned. You can learn more about that in my Renault episode. Since AM General was still a subsidiary of American Motors, this new ownership by Renault became a problem. Back then, the United States government did not allow any defense contractor to be foreign-owned. Luckily, by 1983, AM General was purchased by the LTV Corporation, which back then was a large U.S.-owned conglomerate that owned companies in many different industries, and soon moved the AM General vehicle production to South Bend, Indiana, where it is still headquartered today. One of AM General's most significant vehicles began production in 1984 with the HMMWV, which stood for High Mobility Multi-Purpose Wheeled Vehicle, a name that would more often be shortened to Humvee. Although its primary destination was deployment to war zones, the Humvee wasn't originally intended to be on the front lines, but instead for transporting personnel behind the front lines. Although it first went into service during the U.S. invasion of Panama in 1989, it became most famous for its role in the 1990 Gulf War and Operation Desert Storm in 1991. Although previous wars had plenty of historical video footage, with the advent of cable news, Gulf War footage was shown on American television in real time, far more than in the Vietnam era, and that brought the Humvee into the national spotlight. Although the idea of capitalizing on that popularity by making the Humvee available for civilian use probably crossed the minds of many back in the early 90s, it took a famous actor, best known for his tough guy movie roles, to make that idea a reality. During filming of the movie Kindergarten Cop, its star, Arnold Schwarzenegger, reportedly saw some Humvees in an army convoy, which led to his push for a civilian version of the Humvee.
What's the matter?
I have a headache.
It might be a tumor.
It's not a tumor.
Arnold bought the first two off the assembly line, and although the connection between Arnold and these big trucks seemed natural back then, I find it all the more ironic that a little over a decade later, Arnold would be elected governor of the state of California, which had, and still does have, the most strict vehicle emission laws in the United States.
Just remember, I'll be back.
Production of the civilian Humvee, now renamed as the Hummer, officially started in 1992 and were built alongside the military Humvees, for the most part anyway. Once all the common parts were assembled, the civilian Hummers moved production to a separate building to be painted, and the interiors upgraded with better seats, including optional leather, added air conditioning, and sound systems. The Hummer was available to the public in all the same multiple configurations as the military version, although the most popular were the wagon and convertible models. Just like the Humvee, you could get a central tire inflation system, and the brakes were inboard, not inside the tire, to allow for greater ground clearance. And the Hummer offered the same seating configuration as the military version, with a huge console containing the drivetrain, separating the left and right side seats in both rows. So despite its huge size, it could only carry 4 people. This lack of interior space clearly didn't matter to those who knew their Hummer could drive through 30 inches of water, or climb steps up to 22 inches high. Well, at least those were the official numbers. Some owners proved they could climb much higher. But what the owners didn't get was speed.
On the highway, a Hummer handles more like a sports car than a truck.
The Hummer used a GM-sourced Detroit diesel V8, which took over 18 seconds to get up to 60 miles per hour. To reach 80 took almost 50 seconds, and that was pretty much top speed. Although if you were moving over 6,700 pounds down the street, you probably wouldn't want to be going any faster, since braking from that speed required more than 250 feet. Its width of 86.5 inches made it 10 inches wider than a Chevy Caprice back then, so good luck parking it in any normal-sized parking space. But clearly the people who bought the original civilian Hummer didn't care about all the inconveniences it had as a commuter vehicle. They also had no problem with the price, costing over $70,000 in 1992. That's almost $140,000 today, which may be why so few people bought them, with only just over 11,800 sold over 15 years, which averages to less than 1,000 per year. But it clearly was enough sales for GM to decide to take ownership of the Hummer brand name from AM General in 1999. AM General continued to build the Hummer, but it was now marketed by GM as the Hummer H1, with the expectation that there would be more H-numbered vehicles in the future. That next vehicle was launched in 2002 as the Hummer H2. Although AM General also built the H2, it was on the GMT 820 platform, which was a combination of the Chevrolet 2500 heavy-duty pickup in the front and the 1500 regular-duty pickup in the rear. Just like the H1, the H2 made no attempt to undo the blocky design of its predecessor, including the relatively short windows all around, including the rear, and this was back in the day when backup cameras weren't available. The H2 had plenty of luxury touches, so much so that it probably ate into the sales of GM's own Cadillac Escalade. It also had a front grille that had more than a passing resemblance to the 7-slotted Jeep grille, so much so that Jeep's parent at the time, Daimler Chrysler, attempted to sue GM for trademark infringement in 2003. That lawsuit was eventually dismissed, since the Hummer could trace its roots back to American Motors, who once owned the Jeep brand and was just continuing the grille design they had all along. Although the H2 sold much better than the H1, it was still a huge vehicle with a 6-liter V8 and quickly became a controversial status symbol.
I guess I missed the part of the meeting where you drive through the dining room and right out the front door.
Most people that owned them probably never came close to utilizing the truck's full potential. They instead probably just liked all the attention they got.
I want to have a car that attracts a woman with a shave down below.
Well, that would be a Corvette or a Hummer.
However, by the mid-2000s, huge trucks like these were becoming less popular, no thanks to rising gas prices, and they weren't exactly earth-friendly. Although that public backlash helped in the decision for Ford to kill off the Excursion by 2006, the H2 instead got a new body style option by 2005, called the H2 SUT for Sport Utility Truck, which replaced the cargo area behind the rear seats with a pickup bed. From the outside, the pickup bed looked impractically small. However, the H2 had a feature similar to the Chevy Avalanche back then, with a midgate that could drop to allow access to the bed from inside. 2006 was also the one and only year for a special version of the H1, called the H1 Alpha. The Alpha had the H1's most powerful engine up to that point, a 6.6-liter Duramax turbo diesel, along with a 5-speed Allison transmission, with the goal of helping to turn around sluggish sales, which dropped to only 252 for 2004. The 2005 model year was skipped in preparation for the Alpha model, which now made 300 horsepower and 520 foot-pounds of torque, and featured a new interior design. Despite the improvements, 2006 sales only reached 729, and GM withdrew any further support for the project, resulting in 2006 being the final model year for the H1. The Alpha model is now the most highly sought-after version of the H1, and remaining examples are appreciating in value. With the H1 production ending, GM put more focus on a new entry to the Hummer brand, the H3, which launched in 2005 for the 2006 model year, and was the first and only Hummer model that wasn't built by AM General.
When I got my new H3, I customized it.
It instead was on a modified version of the Chevy Colorado and GMC Canyon truck platform, modified so much so that although they were built in the same factory, only 10% of the Colorado and Canyon parts were shared with the H3. The H3 was designed to look just like a shrunken version of the H2, complete with the same small blocky windows that were still difficult to see out of. Its initial engine option was a 3.5-liter inline 5-cylinder, making 220 horsepower, Although smaller by far than the H2's V8, it matched much of the H2's off-road capabilities, being able to ford 27 inches of water, and offered optional 33-inch tires and off-road shocks. With a smaller size that made it more attractive to a larger potential audience, sales peaked at over 54,000 in 2006, far higher than the H2 that same year, making it clear that in order to stay relevant, Hummer had to keep downsizing. Development on a potential H4 model began in 2004 that would have been around the same size as a Jeep Wrangler and was introduced as the HX concept in 2008. However, any plans for a possible H4 model were being drowned out by GM's bankruptcy announcement in 2009. All the GM divisions were being scrutinized, and everyone knew that if any divisions needed to be cut to save the company, the younger divisions would be the first to go, and Hummer was the youngest, having only been part of GM for 10 years.
Thank God for rednecks!
The H1 had been gone since 2006, and the H2, despite getting an all-new interior in 2008, and in production in 2009. And the H3, despite the bankruptcy announcement, still managed to get a new pickup truck variant in 2009, called the H3T, and unlike the H2 pickup, it increased the H3's length by 2 feet to accommodate the pickup bed. The official announcement of the end of the Hummer brand was on June 1st, 2009, but they followed that up the next day, saying Hummer would be sold to a Chinese buyer. However, by February 2010, that deal fell through, although H3 production continued until May of that year. The Hummer brand remained relegated to history after 2010, or so most people thought, until rumors began circulating in 2019 that GM was considering bringing back the name by 2021. What was revealed that same year was the last thing anyone expected to be associated with a gas-guzzling Hummer, an all-electric truck. But instead of bringing Hummer back as its own brand, it is now part of GMC, with Hummer being planned as an eventual sub-brand under GMC. The first edition of the 2022 Hummer EV sold out with pre-orders in only 10 minutes, despite its over $110,000 price. This thing weighs over 9,000 pounds, has 1,000 horsepower, and 329 miles of range. As expected, there's been plenty of outcry of hatred from the old Hummer faithful, including some I got as comments here on my channel when I announced on my community page that I would be doing a Hummer episode. Whether you like it or not, Hummer will likely never go back to its origins, and maybe someday a Hummer EV could be available at a price that at least a few of us can afford.
Darn.
Thanks for watching. If you like this video, click the like button and subscribe to my channel.
When I'm finished with you, you'll have mud in places you didn't know you had.
Yo, I've never been off-road!
If you once owned a car from the 80s to mid-2000s that you rarely see today and would like it featured in a future episode, leave a reply in the comments or contact me at the email shown here. See you next time.